Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Nader Hashemi. I teach at Georgetown University, and it's a huge honor for me to be in conversation tonight with Fawaz Gerges, who is an old friend, a collaborator, but also one of the leading scholars of the contemporary Middle East. I want to begin by thanking Busboys and Poets. We've established a really great relationship in terms of authors and people that we bring into the city, and we come down here and we have a conversation. We reach a different crowd. We've been running a Gaza Lecture Series for roughly about 1 year now, and I'm happy to announce that those Gaza Lecture Series are going to continue, both on the main campus and here at Busboys and Poets. So you can stay tuned for further information about that. So for those of you who don't know our guest tonight, Fawaz Gerges is a prolific scholar, a public intellectual, and one of the great historians of the modern Middle East. He's based in London, and he's been teaching for many years now at the London School of Economics. He specializes in social movements in the Arab world, state-society relations, the international relations of the Middle East, and American foreign policy toward the region. He's authored 9 books, 2 edited volumes, and some of his most well-received and influential books have been studies of radical political Islam, specifically his book, The Far Enemy, Why Jihad Went Global, and ISIS, A History, have won numerous awards. They're widely cited and considered standard reference texts in the field. And he authored this other book. It's a big, thick book that hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves, called Making the Arab World, Nasser, Qutb, and the Clash That Shaped the Middle East. It's an important book that looks at the ideological origins of 2 main intellectual currents of thought, Arab nationalism and revolutionary political Islam. In the last 2 years, he's published 2 important books. What Really Went Wrong? The West and the Failure of Democracy in the Middle East, and forthcoming in April, The Great Betrayal, The Struggle for Freedom and Democracy in the Middle East, published by Princeton University Press. I wish we had the time to do a deep dive into all of these books. We don't have that time to go into all of them, but we're going to actually, I think, touch on all of these books by focusing on what's happening in the Middle East today. The focus for tonight is to talk about contemporary events, themes, and topics that you're all aware of. And in doing so, we're also going to be touching upon some of these books that I just referenced that Fawaz Gerges has published. Tonight we're going to talk about Gaza and the war with Israel, and of course the big news that everyone is talking about, the announcement of a ceasefire deal. I also want to ask Fawaz some questions about the future of Syria after Assad. I also want to ask him about Lebanon and Hezbollah after recent events. And unfortunately, we have a new president coming in. And I want to ask him a few questions also about Trump in the Middle East, since that's relevant for the world that we're living in. We'll speak for maybe about 30, 40 minutes and then turn the floor over to all of you for questions and answers. So, Fawaz, thank you for being here. I know you're still on London time, which means it's right, I don't know what, 11 o'clock at night in London, so we'll try not to keep you too late. Let me ask you a first question about Gaza. In your reading, what's the significance of this ceasefire deal that's been announced? What are the takeaways? What can we learn about this ceasefire deal that was announced yesterday and is supposed to be implemented beginning this Sunday? What does this reveal about Gaza, Hamas, and the future of this conflict? Could you share us your thoughts?
Thank you, Nader. Hello, everyone. I really deeply appreciate the fact that you come here.
Use the microphone closer, yeah.
To join us tonight, and I really look forward to your questions. So I hope it's not just a conversation between myself and Nader, but rather it's a conversation between all of us. Is it on? Can you hear me?
You know, for now, use this one, and then we'll switch back and forth.
Nader mentioned my most recent book, just came out by Yale University Press, and it's called What Really Went Wrong? the West and the failure of democracy in the Middle East. And I really urge you to take a look at it, just because the book itself, really, what I do in the book is to go back to the original moment after World War II, to try to understand the foundation of American foreign policy from 1945 up to, the present. The question really I was trying to understand is that why did American foreign policy, why has American foreign policy been on the wrong side of history? I want you to know, and I know you know this, that American foreign policy towards Gaza or America's embrace of autocrats and dictators in the Middle East is not just a byproduct of today. It goes back to the original moment in 1945, starting in 1945, that the United States, and I show, this is not an argument, I show how American foreign policy inherited the imperial legacy of its European allies, particularly France and Britain, literally. That the United States, while France and Britain in the 19th century and the 20th century established a formal empire directly ruled in the region, whether you're talking about Egypt or Syria or Iraq and India, the United States basically created an informal empire. An informal empire, you don't really have to basically direct rule over people, in the Middle East and other places. You create a network of control, whether you're talking about military bases, whether you're talking about defense pacts, whether you're talking about money, whether you're talking about sticks, whether you're talking about economic sanctions, carrots, and what have you. So really, the bottom line is that American foreign policy towards Gaza is not the exception. In fact, it's the rule. Time and again, from 1945 to the present, there is consistency to American foreign policy. It all started in 1953. Most of you know what happened in August 1953. The United States and the United Kingdom toppled one of the most democratic prime ministers in the Middle East and the decolonized world, Mohammad Mossadegh, the Prime Minister of Iran, in August, 23rd of August 1953, and replaced a legitimate leader in Iran with a dictator, that's the Shah of Iran. It started in 1953 and back to Gaza itself. It's whether you're talking about Arab autocrats, Middle Eastern autocrats, whether you're talking about emirs and kings, whether you're talking about, the various kind of colonialism and the United States truly, and I'm not exaggerating, has been consistently on the wrong side of history. This is really one of, and I'm not exaggerating, you really and that's why Gaza is very important for us, because really Gaza is the culmination of American foreign policy in the past 70 years. And what's really special about Gaza is that you have a democratic administration. You're not talking about Republican administration. A democratic administration is supposed to be open-minded, liberal, the sanctity of life, the rule of law.
Human rights.
It's all of that. So what does the ceasefire in Gaza, what's the significance of the ceasefire in Gaza? This is a temporary ceasefire. The ceasefire in Gaza does not really mean the end of the war. Does not mean the end of the war. It means the end of the intense phase of Israel war, but the war will continue by other means. Let me give you one example what I mean by that. Israeli forces will remain in many parts of Gaza. Even though the ceasefire stipulates that Israeli forces will pull out from very, densely populated areas in Gaza. Point two, Israel has the right to carry out military activities even during the first phase of the ceasefire, the first, 6 weeks, up to 2 kilometers in Gaza. Israel has established a huge buffer zone between in the northern Gaza. Israeli leaders have made it very clear that they have no intention of ending the war period, even though President Biden said that the second and the third phase basically will see Israel pulling out all its forces. What Israel wants, and on record, Israel wants to have a free hand in Gaza. And a free hand in Gaza means Israel wants to be able to carry out military activities anytime it deems to be possible. It wants a similar situation to the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, and now what we're seeing in Lebanon itself. Am I happy with the ceasefire? I am elated. I am delighted, truly. All of us are delighted. The Palestinians, I don't need to tell you about, and some of you have been more active than any one of us. I don't tend to tell you about the hellish life, the catastrophe. I don't need to tell you about the deep scars. I don't need to tell you about the hospitals, the schools, the cultural infrastructure of Gaza. Gaza is really gone. I mean, people say, how long will it take? It will take decades to rebuild Gaza. I'm also happy that some of the hostages, Israeli hostages, will be released, and their families, the pain and the suffering of Israeli. It's all good, but please don't ever have the illusion that Israel will end its war in Gaza, that Israel will end its war in the occupied West Bank, or Israel will basically end its military activities in southern Lebanon and the Golan Heights. And more importantly, it's not about the ceasefire. There is no political vision. No one is talking about a political vision, either for Gaza or the West Bank or East Jerusalem. There is no constituency in Israel that ever utters the name of a Palestinian state, even on the 1967 borders. So even though we should celebrate this particular moment, it's a moment of hope for the Palestinians and the Israeli hostages and the 10,000 Palestinian prisoners and hostages in Israeli prison. But I think the war will continue by other means, and I don't think there is. Does anyone here see a light at the end of the tunnel? Not only to establish a Palestinian state, but to have genuine reconciliation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I really don't give a damn about an Israeli state and a Palestinian state. The question is, can we ever reach a stage of genuine reconciliation, of coexistence between the two people, the Palestinians and the Israelis? I just don't see it.
So 2 days ago, Secretary of State Blinken made a admission that shocked me, where he said that 15 months into this conflict, Hamas has been able to recruit as many militants to its side as they have lost. In other words, there are as many Hamas fighters today as there were on October the 7th. How is this possible given the huge imbalance in military power, the tonnage of bombs that have been dropped on Gaza? We hear reports of 2 or 3 Hiroshima-type devastating bombs. The best technology in the world that the West could muster, an air bridge of weapons, nonstop, full support for Israel, and 15 months later, Blinken is effectively saying that Israel's war aims, the number one being the defeat of Hamas, have basically failed. The number of Hamas fighters have increased in many ways, not decreased. How do you explain that?
Anthony Blinken said more than that, the first time ever. He not only said that Hamas has been able to recruit as many fighters as the one that Israel killed from the 7th of October till the present. He basically, the first time ever, Blinken said that Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition did not really want to think about the morning after, did not really have a strategy. That Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition have done everything in their power to basically do as much as damage in Gaza without really having a vision for Gaza for the morning after. He made it very clear that the Benjamin Netanyahu, the led government, basically did not really want to participate in any kind of planning, pre-planning for the morning after. To come back to your question, Hamas is down, make no doubts about it. We don't know no one knows how many Hamas fighters were killed. I mean, we're speculating. The Israelis say, according to their numbers, and I don't trust their numbers, and please don't trust their numbers, and I know you don't. They say they have killed 17,000 Hamas fighters. That's what they say. I don't know. I don't have the numbers. The Americans basically often go with whatever Israel does. But according to American intelligence and Antony Blinken and other reports, Hamas has been able to recruit probably more than 17,000. Hamas is still standing. Antony Blinken says, quote unquote, every time that Israel says we have cleansed a particular area of Gaza, a month later, Hamas returns to the same area. The most fierce battles in Gaza, the fiercest battles in Gaza have been taking place in North Gaza, the area that was cleansed during the first months of the war itself. Even yesterday, almost every day, Hamas has been able to really inflict casualties on Israel. There is no vacuum in Gaza, by the way. The only vacuum in Gaza is the extent of destruction, the human loss. That on average, according to the United Nations, you're talking about really between 70–80% of Gaza has been utterly destroyed. 92% of schools have been destroyed, 75% of hospitals. The numbers of killed, as you well know, please don't buy the fact that only 46,000 Palestinians have been killed. Many studies now, the estimation, the scientific, between 200,000 and 150,000. But for me, as important, not to mention 110,000 injured, are the deep scars. How long will it take for the deep scars to heal, if ever? But the question is, there is no other authority, there is no other group that can ever replace Hamas in Gaza. And Israel did not just drop. Israel has dropped the equivalent of four tactical nuclear weapons on Gaza. 4, according to American intelligence. Yet Hamas still standing in Gaza. And despite everything that Antony Blinken and regional players and the Palestinian authorities have been trying to do, there is no one else. I mean, how do we explain this? And the only thing, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the videos yesterday in Gaza, the celebration in Gaza. I myself, I was really surprised to see Hamas fighters and the people celebrating with Hamas fighters. That despite all the hellish destruction of Gaza, the Palestinians have rallied around Hamas. I know I said it, on CNN a few months ago, and I said, in the eyes of many Palestinians, Hamas speaks for a sizable segment of the Palestinians in Gaza. Why? I mean, as a historian, as a sociologist, I don't think there's a mystery, people. What's the mystery about people rallying around, groups and fighters who basically stand up to defend their dignity? I mean, we know it doesn't matter whether we like Hamas or not. Hamas is not my cup of tea. The Palestinians deserve better, deserve a different kind. I really mean it. And I hope you push back. But the reality is, there is no other group that's standing up and trying to defend the Palestinians, defending Palestinian dignity, trying to show to push back against military occupation. That's the reality. So in a way, to come back to your question, I don't think there's any authority, whether the war continues for the next 4 or 5 years. Hamas is it. And the only way around it is really somehow, I mean, we hope that the Palestinians put their house in order, that elections take place and the Palestinians, not us, who are we to tell the Palestinians, decide really on a kind of a kind of a new leadership, a kind of a new governance structure, which will include most of the Palestinian groups and most of the Palestinian communities, and also integrate the process between the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. That's the hope. But in the meantime, Hamas will continue to be a very, very powerful force in Gaza and the West Bank, not just in Gaza.
How do you reconcile what you just said about Hamas's popularity in Gaza with a lot of the mainstream Western reporting? Is that the people in Gaza, many of them hate Hamas because they blame them for starting this war on October the 7th, provoking Israel to launch this brutal attack, and then blaming Hamas for, just abandoning them to the Israeli onslaught. I mean, that's what you hear in a lot of the reporting, that Hamas is not as popular as you have just said. How do you reconcile your narrative with what we read in the press here?
Well, look, anyone who tells you, and I know this, you know this, I don't need to tell you, anyone who tells you that we have our finger on the pulse of Palestinian public opinion in Gaza is not telling the truth. We don't know. We don't have surveys. This is a moving target. So please, whenever you read a report, this is all speculation depending on a very, very minor samples. But my ears and my eyes, I use my instinct. I use my imagination. Are there Palestinians there who are really angry with Hamas? You bet. I mean, families, it has been a devastating war. Part and parcel, people, and you know this, part and parcel of Israel's strategy since October the 7th. Israel's strategy has been trying to bleed the population in Gaza and turn the population in Gaza against Hamas. This is not my words. Israel's strategy, as has been publicly laid out, is to basically force to really bring about a transformative shift in public attitude. The idea was, the Israelis believed, if we really bleed the population, that the Palestinian population basically will turn against, Hamas, against their tormentors. But the reality is, the people in Gaza realize that Hamas is an integral part of their social fabric. And really, the videos that we have seen in the past 24 hours, my eyes does not, these are facts. Whether children or women or elderly people are celebrating this ceasefire as a kind of really, what it shows for them is the resilience of Palestinians, the resilience of their agency. They are very proud of the fact that even though they have been bleeding for 15 months, that they push back, they're fighting, they're resisting. So my take on it, I don't really know the extent of the public opinion shift, but I have no doubts in my mind that Hamas continues to have a sizable segment that supports its goals of liberation and resistance against the Israelis. And if Israel continues, if Israel maintains its occupation of Gaza, and I have no doubts that it will, I think you're going to see resistance and you're going to see a war of attrition, a guerrilla war for many years to come.
A question about Gaza and the broader politics of the Arab world. How do you explain the fact that, notwithstanding the devastation of Gaza that is felt very deeply in the neighboring Arab countries at the popular level, the Arab authoritarian order has been preserved? None of the countries, for example, that have diplomatic relations with Israel have severed relations with Israel over their genocide in Gaza. So people in Washington, D.C. sort of look at that and they say, okay, there might be some people in Jordan who are upset, but all of the Arab regimes are still in power. They're still coordinating intelligence with the United States and Israel. It seems like they've weathered the storm. So yes, Palestinians have suffered, but the overall political order of pro-American Arab regimes seems to be very much intact and unaffected by the genocide in Gaza. Could you comment?
In the short term, first of all, I don't know if you've read the book War by Woodward. Have you seen the book, by the way? Have you, on Gaza? And the book itself basically documents Antony Blinken's diplomatic visits to various Arab countries after the 7th of October. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, literally in every single country. And please take a look at the chapter on Gaza. What Arab leaders told Antony Blinken, whether you're talking about the King of Jordan, whether you're talking about the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, whether you're talking about al-Fattah al-Sisi. The consensus is, please tell the Israelis we are with them. We want them to destroy Hamas. Literally. Literally every, it's okay, you can leave him here. It's literally, Woodward basically documents the story. Every single Arab leader wanted Israel to finish Hamas off. Hamas represented a threat not only to Israel, settler colonialism. Hamas represent a threat to the dominant authoritarian order, because it truly is, by the way, because it's an Islamist movement, and political Islam is seen, as you know, Nader, as representing a threat. The reason why haven't we seen major popular uprising in the Arab world? Well, I don't need to tell you, this is a very simple question. I mean, imagine if you're living in Egypt, or if you're living, even the few activists who tried to really protest were arrested and disappeared. I want you to know that under the surface, there is really a huge popular rage and anger in almost every single Arab country. But the simple answer is repression. The simple answer is fear. But this does not really mean, and this is where we really need to take into account that, in fact, there is a popular revolt brewing under the surface. It really would take a spark, a black swan, to basically bring about huge implosions in every single country in the region. So the Americans, you're absolutely correct. The Americans believe, or the Biden administration, sorry, the Biden administration believes that this is a passing storm, that it will basically disappear. It will not have major consequences. I have no doubts in my mind, and I'm a historian of the region, and I've written extensively on revolutionary movement, on Salafi jihadist movement. Gaza will come to haunt the Middle East for many decades to come. Gaza will haunt American foreign policy for many decades, in the same way that the Iraq War will come to haunt the United States. American foreign policy thinks in terms of now, in terms of really in the next few years. Some of us, we barked for many years, I want you to know, about American foreign policy really in the region for many years. But the problem is, if you take the longue durée, if you really think about the patterns and about the consequences and the implications, I think if I were an American policymaker, a visionary American foreign policymaker, a foreign policymaker who knows the role of history, the importance of history, I would be really terrified. I really would be, of the consequences, of the midterm and the long-term consequences of what has happened in Gaza. You sent me an email a few days ago, Nader, and here you have an American, in charge of the American intelligence services. What did he say? Can you tell?
So, senior American intelligence officials testifying before Congress have said that the level of anti-Americanism that they're picking up directed at U.S. targets and U.S. assets are at the highest they've ever recorded in recent years, and that's a direct result of the war in Gaza affecting popular opinion and generating more anti-American sentiment in the region, and they've never seen it before.
Not only that, he says that recruitment for militant and extremist groups has never been as big as it is today. And this is the question for many of us who are concerned about peace and stability and security, not just only the sanctity of life, and we should be, regardless whether it would be extremism or not. I think, what we've seen in Syria and other places, don't ever underestimate. The Middle East truly, by the way, as historians of the region, people in the region really continuously surprise the world. Whether you're talking about the revolution in Iran in 1979, or the Arab Spring revolts of 2010, 2012, or what happened on the 7th of October, or the toppling of Bashar al-Assad. We might wake up tomorrow. Here is a big prediction. We might wake up tomorrow or one day sooner than you think, and one of the big states in the region, the regime itself shattered beyond any kind into a million pieces. Truly. It could take a spark to ignite a huge fire, huge fires. And many of us who are really concerned, I mean, myself, many of us were concerned about reconciliation, about peace, about coexistence. Truly, and I keep saying the 7th of October, what happened on the 7th of October, and of course it was for many Israeli civilians, it was horrible. It's particularly the killing of civilians. But the 7th of October could pale by comparison what could happen in the future. And many of us who really scream and bark about what Israel is doing, because we are concerned about reconciliation. We are concerned about the survival. I am concerned. I am deeply concerned about the survival of the Jewish community in the very heart of the Arab world. For me, the survival of the Jewish community is fundamental, more important than the bloody coalitions in Israel. And what Netanyahu and his extremist coalition have been doing is truly risking the very survival of this tiny community in the heart of the region. And it's never discussed, it's never debated. The question is, terrorism, or the question is, will Israel have security? The question for me, does what Netanyahu do, or has what Netanyahu has been doing, is really basically deepening, embedding Israel in the heart of the region? Or is what Netanyahu is doing is really risking and threatening the very survival of the Jews in the long term? Mm-hmm. So it's not just about, because in American foreign policy, it's all about terrorism, extremism, the security implication. As historians, we should be concerned about the big question, the fundamental question, of that this tiny community that in the heart of the Arabic and the Islamic world, how do we make sure that this community is deeply integrated into the social fabric of the region, as opposed to really being concerned about tiny, narrow security questions.
So let's turn quickly to Lebanon. There's a lot of excitement in the West over recent developments in Lebanon. Hezbollah's back has been broken. Hassan Nasrallah is dead. The senior leadership of the organization is gone. There's now a pro-American, pro-Saudi president and prime minister in power. This is a great opportunity for the future of Lebanon, and we should be celebrating these developments. Could you comment?
Well, I mean, Hezbollah, Hezbollah suffered major blows. The top leaders, political leaders, and military leaders of Hezbollah have been killed, in the past few months. And a sizable, element of its aspect of its military arsenal has been destroyed. So Hezbollah is really bled quite a great deal. It has lost about 4,000 fighters and leaders and commanders. But Hezbollah still has at least 15,000 hardened fighters and commanders, at least. Its ground operation is fully intact. Its ideology, its social base of support, its infrastructure. So much more than Hamas, Hezbollah is still standing. And Hezbollah now is really restructuring its military and political and ideological structure. Make no doubts about it. Hezbollah did fight to the last day before the ceasefire, even though Israel really blabbed Hezbollah. The reason why, what we need to understand is that Hezbollah, what's different about 2006 and 2024, Hezbollah became too much of a conventional army. And from 2006 to 2024, it really became extremely an inflated, a group of forces. Israel succeeded in infiltrating Hezbollah from top down, literally infiltrated the decision-making process. Hezbollah became too sloppy, and that's why Israel has succeeded to a large extent in really delivering major blows. But Hezbollah is rebuilding its rank and file. Hezbollah continues to be a sizable military force. Hezbollah is fully integrated into the political scene. Any attempt to isolate Hezbollah from the political scene will basically trigger civil strife in the country. I doubt it very much whether Hezbollah could be neglected or whether Hezbollah could be excluded. This is a recipe for really social strife and civil strife in Lebanon.
Okay, let's quickly turn to Syria, because I want to give this audience a chance to ask questions. You gave a talk today at Georgetown that suggested that in post-Assad Syria, we are eventually and inevitably going to see a new form of authoritarianism under the leadership of Ahmad al-Shara and these Sunni militants who now are dominating the country. You use the term authoritarianism light. That's going to be the future of Syria. The prospects for democracy or for civil society look weak, and we just have to get used to that new reality. Could you summarize your argument about where Syria is headed today?
Well, I mean, we need plenty of time because we spent an hour and a half laying out the argument.
Short version.
I mean, what you have now in Syria, the entire system collapsed. The entire government collapsed, like a ripened fruit, in less than 2 weeks. There is no army, there is no security force, there is no economy, there is no bureaucracy, there is nothing. There's a vacuum, literally a vacuum. And what Israel did after the fall of Assad, I don't know if you follow the news of Syria, Israel systematically destroyed the strategic capacity of the Syrian army. Airports, helicopters, tanks, literally the entire strategic assets of the Syrian army utterly disappeared. There is no army anymore. Literally the country, what you have in Syria is similar to what happened in Iraq after the United States invaded and occupied Iraq in 2003. Remember, the United States dissolved the Iraqi army, and there was a major security vacuum that almost destroyed Iraq. So what you have now in Iraq is a group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. It used to be part of Al-Qaeda, but the leader of HTS has evolved, has basically shed his extremist ideology. Even though he is no longer part of Al-Qaeda, but HTS and the leader of this group called Ahmad al-Shara, he used to be called Abu Muhammad al-Gulani, is very much committed. He believes in the application of a rigid interpretation of Sharia. Sharia is Islamic law. He is deeply committed to that. And what you're going to see and what we are seeing in Syria is basically the replacement of a very brutal authoritarian regime with an authoritarian light Salafi Sunni Islamist regime. Syria is much freer than it used to be. This will not be a repressive regime like the Assad, but the nascent government that's emerging in Syria, and it's still early, this government will not be based on the will of the people, on the electoral box. It will be based on a rigid interpretation of Sharia, that is the sacred will be inscribed as the foundation of the political order. I have nothing against, the application of a Sharia, but the application of the HTS interpretation of the Sharia is very rigid, is very inflexible. It does not take into account that Syria is a very fragmented and diverse country, that there are millions of Syrians who are Muslims but do not really want basically to see a rigid application of a Sharia. They want citizenship. They want the rule of law. They want everyone they want a representative government. So the bottom line is that sadly and tragically for Syria, in the next few years, I don't think we're going to see a democratic country in Syria. The word democracy, or even Islamic democracy, is seen as un-Islamic. It's seen to be a secular concept.
By who?
So,
By HTS.
Absolutely. So in a way, I think in the next 4 or 5 years, what we're going to see in Syria is we're not going to see a clean break with authoritarianism. We're going to see what we call is, Nader and I, is a kind of a form of ethnic religious authoritarianism, which really has been the dominant force in Arab countries, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, and other places. And this is, for some of us who really believe that the Syrian people deserve a break, that the Syrian people deserve a representative government, that the Syrian people should really be given a choice. I think, for now, I don't think the Syrians will see a democratic government, or let alone a representative government. Elections will take place, make no doubts about it. But elections are really a means to an end. And the end is really the application of a Sharia, the Islamic law, as it's interpreted by HTS. Because you have 14 centuries of Islamic interpretation and counter-interpretation and counter-interpretation. But for radical Salafi Sunnis, they have a very, sadly, inflexible and rigid interpretation of the Sharia, which really means that human law, the will of the people, is not really the highest law of the land.
Okay, so last question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. The inauguration of the new president is coming very soon. Is there any reason to believe that Trump's Middle East policy this time around will be any different than it was the last time?
Well, I've mentioned earlier that my book is about American foreign policy, that the West and the failure of democracy. I have not seen a single sign. I have not seen anything that the new administration will really provide any kind of a new beginning, or a progressive beginning, or a promising beginning. The team that Donald Trump selected is an extreme team. In fact, the team that President Trump has selected is more extreme than the Netanyahu team. Some of his team, they don't really believe even the Palestinians exist. What are the Palestinians? Some of them, in fact, the debate, and you'll see, and I hope I am wrong, the debate in the next 4 years will not be about the need to establish a Palestinian state. The big debate in the next 4 years will be about whether Israel will be able to annex the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, and whether basically Israel will continue its war by other means in Gaza. I don't see, because you see Donald Trump, of course, he's not a warmonger like the Republicans and Democrats. He really does. His temperament is against war. But sadly and tragically, the team that he has selected, and here is what I fear the most, even though I fear the annexation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, what I fear the most is really all-out war against Iran. And the question that many of us are really anxious about, whether Benjamin Netanyahu will be able to drag Donald Trump into war with Iran, under the pretext that somehow they need to destroy Iran's nuclear program. And what's really alarming, based on facts, is that there is war scenario planning by the Biden administration and the Trump deal for a military option against Iran. And if you read the various foreign policy analysts who are close to both parties, they're beginning to advocate that give Iran one last diplomatic chance and then, go on the attack, on the military attack against Iran. So it's, all in all, I fear we should fear the worst from the Trump administration. I hope he proves us wrong, but we have to see it before even we think about any kind of a promising beginning.
Okay, let's turn the attention back to the audience who's been sitting patiently and listening to this conversation. The floor is open for comments, questions, reactions, or criticism. Go ahead. Oh, wait, there's
So, do you know if the ceasefire, has the Hamas agreed to release all the hostages, or they still going to have some hostages left after the ceasefire? Do you know? I was just wondering. Thank you.
The ceasefire has three phases. So the first phase, in the next, few weeks, Israel is supposed to release 33 hostages.
Hamas.
Yeah. Mostly women, elderly, children, and people who have difficult conditions. And already Hamas has given the names of 33 Israeli hostages. In return, Israel will pull out of some of the populated area and also will release 30 Palestinian prisoners, between 30...
1,000 Palestinian prisoners.
No, I'm saying it will release 30 Palestinian prisoners for every Israeli hostage. So this is, and it tells you a great deal. I mean, this is, remember, you have about between 10,000 and 12,000 Palestinian prisoners and hostages in Israel, including hundreds of children and women. We hardly discuss this, by the way. How many of you have you read anything in New York Times about, or the Washington Post, that almost 12,000 Palestinian prisoners and hostages, including many, many children. So after the first phase, there will be a second phase and third phase. And Hamas will continue to have about 70 Israeli hostages. Most of them, unfortunately, are dead, were either killed in Gaza or died in Gaza as a result of Israeli operations or other situation. But the problem is many Israeli scholars and strategists believe what Netanyahu wants is basically to get the hostages who are alive, the first phase. So Netanyahu and his coalition will never accept to go through the second phase, which will basically imply that Israel, or require Israel to pull out all its forces from Gaza, because Israel does not really want to pull out all its forces in Gaza. So if you read the Israeli newspapers and what some of the Israeli strategists are saying, because yesterday there was a major article in Haaretz newspaper, and the article is that Netanyahu is playing games. He's really playing tricks on the Israeli public. If Netanyahu really was genuine about basically pulling out of Gaza, why he didn't believe in one single stroke? Because Hamas proposed one thing. Let's do it all in one thing. You get all the hostages and you'll get out of Gaza, period. It was the Biden administration coordinating with the Netanyahu government, talking about three phases. So and that's why Hamas has been really, because Hamas realizes that once Israel gets its hostages, that Israel will resume the war itself. I mean, it does not take a genius. You don't really, I mean, Netanyahu, it's Netanyahu, and it's all open, by the way. I mean, we're not talking about any secret. It's Netanyahu has made it very clear he wants a partial ceasefire. The word is partial. And the Biden administration has tried to oblige Netanyahu by going around, you know how diplomacy is, ambiguity and what have you. So I think the first phase is going to go through because, I mean, I think you have at least 33 Israeli hostages who are alive. And Hamas is also want a respite, and the Palestinians are desperate, the Palestinians in Gaza. The challenge and the question is, will we see a second phase and third phase? And there is a great deal of doubts among, and I'm talking about Israeli scholars and analysts, and there is a really that Netanyahu will accept to basically withdraw Israeli forces from Gaza.
Okay. Floor is open. Yeah, Medea.
You talked about the annexation of the West Bank, and you put it in terms of years from now. Might it be quicker than that? And what would be what would happen to the government of Jordan if indeed that annexation happened?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
You talked about the annexation of the West Bank in terms of long down the road, years ahead, and others have talked about it as something that could happen quickly, that might be a quid pro quo with, and what would happen to the Jordanian government if that happened?
I mean, you're asking really very, very important question. I mean, the Jordanians are terrified. The Jordanians have made it very clear. Any kind of annexation of the West Bank will mean war. Literally, this is because for them, it really would mean the end of the Hashemite kingdom. Because I don't know if you know, the far right in Israel, some of the members of the Netanyahu coalition believe there is really no need for a Palestinian state. Jordan is a Palestinian state. You have a majority of citizens in Jordan. And this goes back for decades, is that why would you establish a Palestinian state? And I think there has been a major systemic drive to really try to put pressure on Palestinians on the West Bank to expel or to force the Palestinians out into Jordan. And Jordan has made it very clear this is war, and they mean it because it means the end of the Hashemite kingdom. I think the reason why we are a bit worried about what's happening, because there seems to be, I don't know if you followed the presidential campaigns, and some of the leading, donors for Donald Trump, and you're talking about tens of millions of US dollars. Basically, specifically, the idea was we want you to really accept the annexation of the West Bank in the same way that you did accept the annexation of the Golan Heights. And it was the Trump administration who basically authorized the annexation of the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. And there are some, talks in Israel, is that the reason why Benjamin Netanyahu has basically agreed to the ceasefire, he gifted the ceasefire to Donald Trump. And the question is, what does really Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition want from the Trump administration? They want either really more settlements, and they are building settlement crazily, or ultimately they want to really annex most of the West Bank. The implication, to come back to your question, I think the Biden administration knows the implications and the consequences for Jordan-Israeli relationship, because Jordan is a pivotal state, an American ally, and Jordan has been, Jordan is very important for the United States. Jordan, to give you an idea how important Jordan for the United States, 10 years ago, Jordan used to receive $100 million in American aid. Jordan now receives $1.3 billion, more than Egypt, and half as Israel. American bases in Jordan, the coordination, it can go on and on and on. So the Biden administration has made it very clear, at least publicly and verbally, as opposed to, but we don't know what the Trump administration, because some of, as you know, his ambassador to, Israel has made it very clear. He said that he's on record saying that it's, there is no West Bank. There is no such thing as a West Bank. It's part of the, Israel. So we really do not know what's going to happen. But it seems to me there are red flags. And the people that Donald Trump has surrounded himself, whether he's ambassador to the United Nations, or whether he's Secretary of State, or his National Security Council, those people are really, talk about Antony Blinken, but these people are really quite ideological. Really far right, hardline ideological. And most of them come from, the evangelical, the kind of, really religious, Christian, hardcore religious. And actually, people, we really underestimate how the evangelical, factor is really much more powerful than your traditional Zionists. They really are, because they view the world through the lens of the sacred, and it's an existential thing. They're waiting for the Messiah, and so it's, even though we do not know, but we really need to prepare ourselves that what the Trump administration could see really is another major implosion, not just in Israel-Palestine relation, but even in Arab-Israeli relations.
At the back, yeah, you're next, and then 2 and 3, and then we'll work our way around. Go ahead. Yep. Wait, there's a microphone. Just hold on.
Hi, hello. It's very nice to meet you. My parents watch you a lot on TV. My question for you is, how can the Syrian government create an army without the army becoming a threat to Israel?
I mean, you're asking really a big question now. Iraq, from 2003 till the present, Iraq has not really been able to rebuild an army. The Iraqi army is work in progress. Even today, the Iraqi army is still dependent on the United States, as you know, still dependent on militias, popular mobilization forces, Shiite militias, to protect the government. I mean, building an army, we talked about it today, building an army, a national army, takes decades, right? I mean, think it's like, brick by brick, block by block. What's the reason why, Nader's question about the reason why we're a bit concerned, because Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, and its hardline religious components, sorry, not religious, Salafi components, are trying to build an army really based on an army, former Islamist fighters, as opposed to really building an army, an inclusive army, an army really that represents the Syrian people, the multiplicity, the complexity of the Syrian people. And Ahmad al-Shara has promoted 50 hardline fighters, Islamist fighters, to senior military position who will lead the new army. So how do you really create a nation? An army should represent the nation, right? The army, I mean, the American army people, the American army is all of the American Republic. The army is the beating heart of the nation. It's security, protect the nation. It will take really decades now for Syria to build an army. And the reason why this is very important, because you have so many armed groups in Syria. So you have the Kurds, you have the nationalist opposition forces, you have the Druze forces, you have regional forces, you have tribal forces. How do you unify the nation? How do you really create an army that basically provides security, protect the nation? And what Israel has done, I talked about Israel systematically destroying the Syrian army. Do you know that Israel now occupies 1% of Syria? Not only the Golan Heights, Israel basically expanded its occupation of Syrian territories after the collapse of the Assad regime. Israeli forces are 28 kilometers away from Damascus, the capital. Have you heard any word from Washington about what Israel has done since, the collapse of Assad? Yeah, everyone should step back, but instead of really pressuring Benjamin Netanyahu and telling Benjamin Netanyahu, step back, let the Syrian people rebuild. Let the Syrian people really reconstruct their society. Let the Syrian people celebrate this moment. Give them some space. But guess what Benjamin Netanyahu keeps saying? Oh, don't worry, it's temporary. We are occupying new areas, strategic areas, only temporarily. And we know, right, what temporary means. They have occupied all the strategic hills and mountains all over, beyond the Golan Heights. So it seems to me, and they're establishing bases, long-term bases. So it's very alarming that without an army, how could really Syria be a stable country? How could really provide security for its population?
Somebody else had their hand up. You're next, and then you. Okay, so go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
Hi. I could be a pessimist, but I believe that there's not necessarily cause for celebration when it comes to the Gaza ceasefire, knowing that the track record of Netanyahu, I don't believe, especially that the opposition, Ben Gvir, said that there will be, he will probably resign or his party will resign, or if the Israeli government agrees or approves on the ceasefire. So I don't believe that there is any room or reason to celebrate the ceasefire, knowing that Netanyahu is more likely to lose political influence if the opposition resigns, and knowing that he needs that support from the opposition. And I don't think that there's reason to celebrate.
Yeah. So why did you say celebrate? At least you're happy.
I mean, I think the reason, first of all, you're right. We know the tricks and the games that Benjamin Netanyahu is playing, right? We've been here before. And already now he's trying to play another trick. He said that Hamas is, not accepting, or is not, which is not true. There are some technical questions. The Americans have made it very clear that the ceasefire does not really, it starts on Sunday. But even if his two extremist coalition members vote against the agreement, he has enough majority. Both the opposition and the centrists made it very clear they will basically support the government. So this is not the question. Here is the question that really I've been thinking about the ceasefire and the entry of basic aid, humanitarian aid to Gaza. That in the agreement, in the ceasefire, Israel has agreed, the agreement stipulates that Israel will accept the entry of at least 600 trucks of a humanitarian aid to northern Gaza and other parts of Gaza, in writing. The question for me, why would Israel agree to the entry of 600 trucks? So that means Israel has really been using starvation as a weapon of war. Israel has systematically and consciously used, food and starve. This is exactly, even they don't realize the contradiction. But the fact is that Israel only now, as a result of the ceasefire, allows humanitarian basic aid. We know this all along, right? Human Rights Watch, international, the United Nations. But this tells you a great deal about how the United States and how the United Kingdom and Germany and many Western governments really have known all along that Israel has been using starvation as a weapon of war against the Palestinians. Because under any kind of international law, basic food should never, and medicine and basic, should never be used as a weapon during war. Yet, here we are now talking about celebrating the fact that you're going to have 600 trucks of basic food, going into Gaza on the first day after the ceasefire is.
Okay, you're next, yeah, and then you, and then Andy.
Hi there. Thank you so much for this. Just to shift to Syria, but what do you think is the role of the?
Can you put it close to you? Yeah.
Sorry. The role of the Gulf states in with the coming Syrian government, will they act as an economic and security guarantor, or how will they influence this in the next phase? Thank you.
So the role of the Gulf states toward the new government in Syria. What role will they play? What attitude will they play in terms of the economy and security?
If you really ask me, I wish, of course, this is our wish list, right? I wish that the Syrian people will be allowed to determine their own affairs. In fact, the less intervention in regional intervention and international intervention in Syria's internal affair, the better for Syria. What do this? I mean, what you have now is really kind of a race between Turkey on the one hand and Saudi Arabia for influence and power inside Syria. So both Turkey and Saudi Arabia are trying to compete for who really has the upper hand. On the whole, what do they want? They want influence, they want stability, they want to make sure that the Syrian revolution does not really spill over into their own countries. They want also to make sure that the new regime that exists in Syria does not really represent any kind of threat to their own regimes, authoritarian regimes. So in a way, and it's really been quite fascinating to me how many regional states have finally embraced the new emerging, HTS inside Syria. And think of how much what Ahmed al-Shara has been really on a, diplomatic offensive, trying to reassure all the states in the world, well, look, we're good guys. We're not going to export the revolution. We will be good guys, and on and on. What they really want, in a simple word, stability. Stability and maintaining the authoritarian system. And of course, they want to spread their influence. And Syria, I don't need to tell you, you're talking about hundreds of billions of reconstruction aid. Hundreds of billions. So everyone wants a piece of the cake once the sanctions are lifted on Syria. So Turkey wants, its share. The Gulf states want their share. The Europeans want their share. It's big money. You're talking about they estimate that Syria needs $500 billion. $500 billion to reconstruct. I mean, many cities in Syria have been utterly destroyed, whether you're talking about Homs or Damascus or Aleppo and what have you.
You're next, yeah. Can we?
Is that this person first,
So no, this person right here with the kafia. If you just raise your hand, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. I have a question. You talk about the spark that could happen in the Middle East, and do you think that will be the fall of the Al-Aqsa Mosque being one of those? And maybe can you talk also, I don't know if you have more knowledge about the role of China and Russia in the region, especially the fact that they want to rewrite the international world order to make it look like the United States being hypocritical in a lot of stuff, especially in the Middle East.
So there's two questions there. You can pick either one. Go ahead.
I'll take the second one because it's, you see, this is a question for all of us. Without Russia's military intervention in Syria in 2015, Assad could not have survived. Russia's military intervention in Syria in 2015 saved and rescued Assad in Syria. Russia's intervention in Syria did not really differ very much from America's intervention on the part of its own autocrats in the region. China does not really give a damn about human rights and the rule of law. China is all about transactional. Because you see, there's this idea in the region, in the world, that somehow the changing international order, the rise of China as a powerful nation, that is, the recovery of Russia or reassertion of Russia's power will have major implications, in the world. In my region, in the Middle East, I don't think so. Because they really, all they care about, Putin, all he cares about is Putin. And the Chinese care about economic trade. It's about transaction. It's all about China. So sadly and tragically, the structure of the international system, the way that that even though American influence has declined in the past 20 years, that America's relatively is declining in relation to China and other powers, the changes that we're seeing in the international system will not have a transformative effect in terms of human rights and the rule of law and civil society and what have you. And that's really the tragedy, because of the structure of power in the international system does not really allow for any kind of transformative change. And that's why, to come back to the bottom line, if we really want change in the region, it has to become bottom up, truly. I mean, what we've seen in Syria, what we've seen in other places, this is the kind of change that really where people, I mean, organized, and people really basically, you know, resist, and people, you know, do politics, protest, and despite the sacrifices. I mean, think how much the Syrian people, how much suffering that the Syrian people between 2011 and 2024. Think of the pain. 500,000 Syrians were killed, 1 million injured, 6 million refugees, 8 million displaced people. Think of the deep scars that 100,000 disappeared. I mean, think of the torture in Assad prisons, right? But yet, think of the resilient agency of the Syrian people. Think how the world had given up on Syria. Think of how many obituaries were written about Assad is the winner, right? And Assad was being embraced by many countries in the world. And yet, the Syrian people triumphed at the end of the day. And I truly, and I'm not exaggerating, I keep saying truly, I have no doubts in my mind that the struggle of the people in the region for self-determination and for dignity and justice will ultimately triumph. The question is, how much sacrifice, how much pain, how long will it take? 13 years, 20 years, but it's going to happen. There's no other way. There's no other really choice for them.
Andy? We need the microphone, yeah, thank you.
At what point do you think that Israel will become too much of a liability for the United States? Can you elaborate a little bit on that? I mean, already I think Nader, you mentioned earlier that the standing of the United States has declined in the world, and more people see the United States as being not a very good place and not a very good. They're not managing their foreign policy very well. So can you speak a little bit about where is this? What's the end game? Is it?
I really would like you to also engage this question, Nader, because you have been thinking a great deal. You know this much more. I've lived all my life here, most of my life in the U.S. I've taught here. Now I teach at the London School of Economics, and America is changing. It truly is. And there is a generational shift in America, and you know this. All the surveys. Across the board, of course, I'm talking about the Democratic Party. I'm not talking about the Republican Party. Even within the Jewish American community, the young generation, young rabbis are progressive. Many American Jews are standing up, defending the Palestinians. Truly, I mean, it is heartwarming to see a sizable aspect of the young American Jews are really defending Palestinian, not in their names. And we're seeing it across the board. And there are some, I mean, within the elite, more and more voices now are really making it very clear that this is unviable. What Israel is doing is basically undermining American credibility, America's moral compass in the world, America's, what America stands for. And in the sense, I mean, when I live outside of the United States, I want you to know that the world, I mean, there is really truly a massive social movement emerging in the world now. And emerging in the sense of not only supporting of the Palestinians, but even within the European countries, whether Spain or Norway or Ireland, really saying, they're fed up with what the United States has been doing vis-a-vis Israel. Will I see any transformative changes in American foreign policy in my lifetime? I doubt it very much, because this is generational change. But Gaza really has been a rupture. It's really been a rupture in how the world views the Palestinians and Israel, and how many millions of Americans view America's relations with Israel. What saddens me deeply, and I know this is that we're seeing really the reverse inside Israel itself. We have not really seen, and people say the Israeli public was traumatized Anthony Blinken keeps saying, you know, you have to understand the Israeli public was traumatized on the 7th of October. Of course, absolutely. I would have been traumatized too, living in Israel. But, I mean, when you have, I mean, literally, the surveys that we have, it's very shocking that a majority of Israelis not only support what Netanyahu is doing, but basically they want more. They're celebrating what their army, and if you see and what the Israeli army is doing, it's beyond shocking. So we're seeing different trends, but what gives me hope is that this generational change that has taken place in the United States, the shift, really, that Israel really is seen now more and more as a liability, that this is not the romantic utopian idea of Israel of the early years. And in the world, I want you to know that even in the heart of the UK, the most, basically, wherever the United States goes, the UK, Britain follows, public opinion is shifting. I mean, big times in almost every single country, Germany, Italy, literally across the board. The question is, how long will Israel and the United States be able to maintain this particular hegemony? I mean, this brutal hegemony, denying Palestinians self-determination and denying Palestinians really a state of their own. I don't know. I mean, Nader, do you?
Look, there's a lot to say on this topic. I think one has to make a distinction between the mass public opinion and the ruling elites. Ruling elites in the West all rallied around Israel after October the 7th. Just take a look at the Democratic Party in this country. There's no evidence that the Clintons or the Obamas or the people in Congress who are Democrats have in any way sort of abandoned Israel. So the more you go up the power ladder, the more you see support for Israel crystallize. But on a mass level, I used to give a lot of talks when I lived in Colorado to just general audiences in bookstores, and the question would always come up, why do we support Israel so much? Why do we give Israel, what are we getting out of this? The average citizen doesn't understand it, and then when they see Israel wreaking havoc on Palestinians and committing genocide, the average person says, look, it doesn't make sense. We've got a lot of problems here in this country. We're giving, all this money to Israel, so how is Israel an asset for us? But among the ruling elites, because of political interest and powerful influence, and then in terms of the view of empire management, Israel still has a lot of value from that perspective. And just to cite one example, if you listen to the discourse in Washington, D.C., among the foreign policy establishment, they're saying, look, this is exactly why we need to support Israel. They're crushing Hamas. They've got rid of Hezbollah. They're going after Iran. They indirectly helped topple Assad. We couldn't do that as a country ourselves. Israel is doing all these things on our behalf. We're supplying it. We're sustaining it. Israel is proving its worth as a loyal ally in the region. This is the view in Washington, D.C., right?
But Hamas and Hezbollah have done nothing to the United States. I mean, it's not like they're an existential threat to us.
Right.
So I'm still trying to understand what is the ROI on this blind support to Israel, and and how long will it take before the United States going to just jump ship and just maybe back another regime there that Israel becomes less of an asset to the United States hegemony?
Yeah. I mean, those are good questions. You want to answer that?
Well, I mean, it goes to the very heart of the relationship between the United States and between Israel. I mean, there are multiple explanations, as you know, the literature. So you have one explanation that's Nader just mentioned, that Israel as a military fortress for the United States and the region. That in fact, American elites keep saying, the investment are worth it. This is nothing, peanuts. Israel is, so there is the other explanation, that Israel is like us. Israel is a pioneer state. Settler colonialism, the United States, American elites celebrate that. The United States itself is a settler colonial country, right? There is another explanation. The idea, the only democracy in the Middle East. No, seriously. I mean, think about it, that even in Israel now, more and more Israelis are debating whether Israel is a democracy because of the rise of the, extreme religious element. And there is also the sense in Europe, in that I think And here is really something that we really don't, I mean, I try when I speak in the Arab world, and I do a lot, and I really urge Arab audiences to take into account that the question of security for Israel and how the Holocaust really, I mean, the question of security for Israel and the question of the Holocaust goes to the very heart of, and I truly, we all need to take into account that how the Holocaust really, the deep scars of the Holocaust they never healed. And in this particular sense, many European, in particular Germany and Europe, they feel the sense of guilt that Israel deserves a break, that Israel, I mean, this is a community that almost was wiped out, that the Holocaust is the greatest crime in world history, and it is. You really have slavery and the Holocaust. You can't, so I think there are multiple factors that play into, and also what we need to understand, I mean, it's not just European guilt. I mean, we know what happened during World War II, how American leaders did not really welcome Jewish, exile, who were basically escaping, fascism and what have you. So there are multiple explanations, even though Chomsky dismisses all these explanations, and I said it's all about economic hegemony, stupid. That Israel, given how important the Middle East is, that the Middle East is, the world economy runs on inexpensive oil and gas, that this is really it. This is where, I mean, and the West is addicted. And Israel, not as a military fortress, Israel protects the economic, treasures, the economic, the fuel that powers the Western economy. So all in all, at the end of the day, multiple explanations, and since the 1950s, by the way, every decade or so, a new explanation is introduced, produced. To give you an idea about what matters, the geopolitical, when Benjamin Netanyahu came and addressed the Congress a few months ago, think of his overarching argument. Two ideas. The first thing is, I am waging a war on your behalf. I am waging a civilizational war on the behalf of the West. We are the vanguard of the West, against the herd, against the uncivil, the barbarians. And his point throughout, since the 7th of October, this is a civilizational war. And Israel is engaged in a civilizational war on the behalf of the West. You're stupid. You need to realize. And just give me the weapons and I'll do it for you. I'll take down all the barbarians, and that basically almost, on the Western gates. So again, it's because he plays on the imagination, trying to show Israel's power. What he really does not say is that it's American money. The United States feeds the war. The United States finances the war. The technology all from the United States. Really, it's an American war. It's an American fortress. Israel is we call it really, the Israel-American relationship in international relations, we call it the tail wags the dog. Israel is a tail, a tiny tail. It's the tiniest of tails. And to come back to is that, what does the tail do, for the empire? Is it really, does it wag the dog, or does the dog really, basically, the big dog, keep the tail, doing its, bidding in the region?
Let's take two more questions and then wrap it up. 1, 2, and then 3. Archie, you'll be the last one. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, 4, the last one at the end.
Yeah, I'd like to push back a little bit on your saying that China is not really interested in the Middle East, or it's transactional only. Because China did it one of the most historic foreign policy negotiations in history, bringing Saudi Arabia and Iran together. And there was not a lot of publicity in this country about how they did this. This is something that was beyond the scope of our diplomacy, as it were.
You're absolutely correct. The question really for you to think about, for all of us, does the Chinese role in bringing about a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran 2 years ago, does it really represent an outlier, or will it be the rule, that China's engagement in the region? Why did China do? Because the reason why it's an outlier, it's a unique case, because both Saudi Arabia and Iran are the two most important economic partners of China. And only China could really bring Iran and Saudi Arabia, because it has huge economic transactional relations with both Saudi Arabia and Iran. Do you know that Saudi Arabia, that China is the biggest economic partner of Saudi Arabia, bigger, more than the United States and more than Europe, and the same thing with Iran. So it was really a case where China invested political capital in order to bridge the divide between its two most important economic partners. But China does not really have a geopolitical strategy so far. China has an economic strategy as opposed to geopolitical. Why should China have geopolitical strategy? China has benefited. I mean, think of all the blunders and the wars that the United States has been doing in the region. And China, it benefits from all of that. In fact, the best thing that the United States could do for China is to do what? To be fighting, waging war, while China focusing on its economy. China has been the main beneficiary of America's foolish and reckless wars, whether it's the war on terror or whether it's really, I mean, what's happening in Gaza.
Go ahead, you're next.
Well, I think Israel is military base. Basically, we have to say it's a military base for America. I'm not totally agree on Syria with you. 2006, what happened, which is you are saying, oh, Russia saving Assad. It's not Assad, it's Syria. Assad defending Palestinian. With all these government, the Arab government, which is all pro-Israel, Assad stay and say, I'm pro-Palestinian. So the Daesh was taking place. So I should have, I'm not defending Assad, totally democratic or whatever, but to compare with the Daesh, which is taking over Iraq too, and and they are all against Shia, which is the plan of the United States. And all this time, Jolani, give me one example that they were against Israeli. See what happened already. The Israeli, more than 800 times the attack to Syria, they didn't even say, don't do it. They were agree, totally. So, and also we have to see the bigger picture, which is United States all against China. Chinese war. In order to get to China, they have to destroy Russia, they have to destroy Iran. So weakest link is Iran. So
is that the question or just a comment you want him to react
and the
to?
comment.
Okay.
And I'm saying, look at the bigger picture, which is Syria, the Jolani, the $10 million hit, now he's wearing, and all these European come and get the picture with him, and they are making scene all around the world. One of the Iranian women 2 years ago, something happened, right? Many people already killed by Jolani's group or Salafi or Wahhabis, which is no objection. There are all these Arab government killing, no human rights in Egypt, Jordan. They don't even say anything. So many Palestinians died, nothing.
Okay, that sounds like a comment rather than a question. Archid is next, right behind you. And then we'll have one more question at the back, and then that'll be it.
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Fawaz and Dr. Hashemi, for having this talk. My question is, we understand the hegemonies in the region, and we also understand that Palestinian people's resistance is something that we will not completely understand, but we have to stand by it. And in your talk, you were talking about how you were somewhat surprised when you saw children and women celebrating with Hamas fighters after the ceasefire announcement. But I was just going through October 7 videos when several IDF troopers were killed. the dead bodies was brought back in at the Khan Yunis Center, and people were celebrating that as well. If I had kind of looked at those videos then, I would have not perhaps understood why that was happening. But after kind of spending the time to understand the occupation, I have a greater understanding. But coming back to the hegemonies, I think we all understand that US imperialism plays a great role in kind of determining how the geopolitics works in that region. But when it comes down to hegemony, I think our language also determines how hegemonies will change. So the question is, why are academicians and like scholars so hesitant to kind of embrace Hamas's resistance? Because in absence of that, people would not be talking about Palestinian nationalism today.
Would you answer? Do you want
Well, this could get me in trouble because
And that's why I asked them to.
Yeah, so I'll get in trouble.
Otherwise, I won't be able to enter England.
I think one reason is to talk objectively and to have your analysis be perceived as being pro-Hamas puts you in jeopardy of violating American law, and you can find yourself in jail, right? So it's not like we can have an open and honest discussion about this, because you will be perceived as supporting a known terrorist actor, and that is giving support and sustenance, and there's a law against that in the United States that you can't do these types of things. So I think academics are conscious of this fact, but I think the way that I teach and discuss this in my classrooms, and of course you're my teaching assistant, so you know this, you know this better than anyone else in the room, is that I think one has to situate the question of Hamas, Gaza, October the 7th, within the broad scope of history and of resistance to colonial settler regimes. This is not the first time that we've seen a colonial settler state that imposes its hegemony on an indigenous people, producing resistance by that people that's being subjugated. I mean, it's not like, you know, we've never seen this before. There's a long history of resistance to oppressive regimes, colonial regimes, of which I would say Hamas is perfectly in keeping with that long tradition. So, you know, in these resistance to colonial repressive regimes, a lot of violent things take place. In a lot of the slave revolts, in a lot of the anti-imperial revolts, in the resistance by the Algerians against French colonialism, a lot of brutal things took place by national resistance forces, right? I mean, if you know anything about the history of resistance by indigenous populations here in the United States to the colonization and dehumanization of this land, a lot of violence happened, mostly coming from the colonial settler states, but also when indigenous populations were resisting and fighting back. And so I think when you look at it in that perspective, what we're seeing in the context of October the 7th is no different than those other moments, slave revolts, anti-imperial revolts, anti-colonial revolts, that produced the same type of dynamic. And I think one of the reasons why it's so difficult to talk about this in the United States is because we in the United States are not an innocent actor just sort of observing this. We're deeply involved, and we have deep interests in maintaining the status quo in Israel-Palestine. I mean, so that's the backdrop that makes it difficult for academics to try and work outside of that framework, because the United States is, you know, a big part of this horror story that's been unfolding in Gaza.
No, I mean, it's basically not just the United States. I was telling Nader a few hours ago, I am helping the defense in a case in the UK about a young man who basically used his social media to basically support Palestinian resistance in Gaza. It's a huge case, and most probably the young man will get 20 years in prison. Basically, the government, the UK government, is asking for 20 years prison sentence for social media posts, because, you know, this young man, you know, had posted dozens of posts celebrating Palestinian resistance in the face of, and it's in a way, both in the United States and the UK, the government really criminalize any kind of debate, that they shut the debate. So it's terrorism, that means shut up, period. So the truth is we really don't have, I mean, the big question, what Nader is saying, we talk about freedom of speech, but we aren't really free to say whatever we want. Even as academics, we are really, we practice censorship. I want you to know that. I am one of those people, and many others. We really choose, I mean, we go out of our way to silence and censor ourselves. And that's horrible in a free society that celebrates freedom. And after all, it's the leader of the free world. It's, you know, right? But on certain questions, no, you're not supposed to, because, you know, you criminalize. Instead of saying, let's flesh out the debate. Let the debate unfold. Let's see whether we can really make sense. Why this, even if you say that Hamas has the right to resist, right, under international law, you can also say that Hamas has no right to kill civilians. It's not, the two are not mutually, you see what I'm saying? No sane person would say that civilians should be killed, that a drop of blood, civilian blood, should be spilled. It's inhumane. It's humanity, right? But we should be able to say, why did Hamas do what it did? The context. And does Hamas have the right to basically resist occupation? These questions, you cannot discuss them. And we truly, I want you to know, all of us, even in the top universities, you know, I teach at the London School of Economics, there are certain questions that are very costly, not just in terms of job, it's morally and politically costly. Character assassination. I mean, I'm more concerned really, and the first time I say it, I'm more concerned about really my character assassination than my job. I don't need my job anymore. I'm too old to, I really don't care. But I feel horrible if that to be morally, you know, a stain on my character as a human being. This is where really the situation becomes very complex.
Last question, I think over here on this side of the room. Second to last question. Okay, so, and then we'll end it for
Let
sure.
me first apologize for the ruckus my son has created. He's a big
he's welcome anytime.
He's very well versed in Israel,
It's, you know.
Palestine, and so we want to make sure that he continues to be. My question is around the timing of the ceasefire agreement. I mean, it feels a little bit almost anticlimactic. Why now, when we have an incoming president who's going to be very supportive of Netanyahu's government? If they had dragged their feet, they probably would have obtained a lot more concessions than by agreeing now. It feels like there's something missing here. And I know that the withdrawal from Lebanon as the deadline is looming. It's coming up very soon. Israel has to withdraw from Lebanon, and we're not really seeing signs that it will withdraw. I think it's January 23rd, the deadline. And so I wonder, you know, from that experience in Lebanon, are there any lessons we can glean about the future of that ceasefire agreement in Gaza?
Nader, I really want you to. No,
this is your terrain.
No. I'm tired, so, and I'll follow you.
I mean, I'd have to think about it. I mean, it's a good question. Are there any lessons? I mean, I think one of the lessons are both the agreement in Lebanon, the agreement for Israel to pull out, has a stipulation in vague enough language that Israel can attack anytime it wants. And if it does, no one in the West is going to hold Israel to account. I mean, one of the lessons over the last 15 months is Israel can literally get away with the genocide, and there will be zero consequences from its international backers in the West. Right? I mean, that's not a controversial point. Zero sanctions. It doesn't matter which government is in power. So I think, you know, that applies to the Lebanon ceasefire, and it also applies to this Gaza ceasefire proposal. As you indicated in your answer, there's enough vague and ambiguous language.
Not ambiguous, very explicit.
Explicit language. That Israel will say, look, Hamas violated it, and we felt threatened, and so we're going to go in and violate the ceasefire. So, you know, I think that's the lesson. The lesson really is, if you take a step back, the powerful will do whatever they want, and they will not be held accountable. And that's the way, unfortunately, history unfolds until there is some sort of resistance or pushback, either in the theater of battle or within those societies in the United States and the West that is tired of this equation and then forces, you know, new policies that would then have implications. I mean, those are the lessons that I see.
I mean, just to give you an idea to really put some flesh on the skeleton. since the ceasefire was signed between Lebanon and Israel, Israel has violated the ceasefire 900 times. According to the United Nations UNIFIL forces in Israel, by the way, received a letter from the President of the United States. This is explicit, giving Israel the right to attack Hezbollah and Lebanon at a time at its own choice and whenever it deems security threat to Israel. So what Israel has been trying to do is to change the rules of engagement. It can attack any time. And by the way, as we talk, Israeli drones all over the country, from Beirut to Tripoli to all over the country, there is no sovereignty. So the ceasefire, as Netanyahu said, quote unquote, the war in Lebanon will not end. The ceasefire in Lebanon does not really mean the end of the war. He was trying to convince his more extremists, because he could take military action, carry out anytime he wants. And the same thing in Gaza. The Americans, in the ceasefire, Israel has the right every day, now and in the future, to attack up to 2 kilometers in Gaza, as we talk, during the first phase. And Israel will have thousands of troops in many parts of Gaza. That is during the first phase and the second phase, if it ever. So the lessons for Israel, as he was trying to convince his extremist coalition yesterday, he said, look guys, we're signing a ceasefire, but we can do whatever we want, just let's sign it. The lesson is we can sign any agreement, but we can still do whatever we want. So what does the lesson is, what does the ceasefire mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. For me, it means that the suffering and the human suffering and the loss and the pain and the population is less, right? So yeah, I celebrate the fact that fewer Palestinians will be killed, fewer Lebanese will be killed, fewer Israelis will be killed. And that's, all in all, it's just lighting a candle in a very dark, universe.
Last question here at the front, and it really has to be the last question, because we're approaching 1 o'clock in London, England, which is where Fawaz is, and I don't want him to fall asleep before he gets back to a hotel. Go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to the annexation question that was raised earlier. My question is, what would actually change for Palestinians in the West Bank if the Israeli government were to annex the West Bank? The West Bank is already under military occupation. The Israelis control day-to-day life for most Palestinians. The Israelis, at least so far, have been unsuccessful in ethnically cleansing the Palestinians out of Gaza into the Sinai. So what would change for Palestinians in the West Bank if annexation was formalized, outside of, dropping the charade that it's not already de facto annexed? Thank you.
I think there are major implications. And one of the questions earlier, what will change, is that the aspirations of the Palestinians of a state of their own will disappear. That there's really, that's exactly what Netanyahu and the far right in Israel and most of the Israeli public, they want to make sure, they want to basically really hammer a nail in the coffin of any Palestinian state, whether a small state or a middle-sized state or a big state, point one. And point two, annexing the West Bank, the idea behind the far right, they want to really expel and force as many Palestinians out of the West Bank as possible. And they're doing it, by the way, constant. Even Blinken in his statement you mentioned, he really showed anger. This is the first time, about Israel, because Blinken he said, what the Israelis are doing in the West Bank is unacceptable in his speech, before the Atlantic Council. He was really angry because he said the extremist settlers, and look, the UK and the United States, sanctioned some settlers. They did not sanction the powers behind. They did not sanction the ministers. They did not really stop the money flowing into, it's not funny. So what it will change the end of any talk about a Palestinian change, and it would allow the far-right extremists in Israel to really begin the process of expulsion, mass expulsion into Jordan, and this could really bring about, really expand, could really trigger a major regional confrontation, not just between the Palestinians and Israel, but in the region itself. So this is, but so far it's still theoretical. What Israel is doing in the meantime is really building more settlement, creating facts on the ground, really pushing a great deal of pressure on the Palestinians, burning homes, destroying, olive trees. The pressure is overwhelming. You follow the situation. Truly, it's amazing how the Palestinian population has really, basically, how resilience and how, strong the Palestinian population in the face of such really brutal attacks by settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem as well.
Fawaz, this is a very dark moment for our world. It's a dark moment for the Middle East. It's a dark moment for the United States as we await the next Trump administration. But your sober, honest, and thoughtful and insightful analysis helps in a very important way to illuminate some of this darkness as we try and prepare for what's coming next. So thank you for being here. Please join me in thanking Fawaz.
Thanks, Nader. This is very good.